The Kingswood woke in layers. First the breath of the river where it ran dark between alder roots, then the low cough of the dogs as they remembered their purpose, then the small, careful sounds of men making a great noise later. The tents wore the pale of mourning as if they were old men in clean shirts. Jon stood outside the flap of the king's pavilion with a cup of water that had the chill of night in it and watched mist tug loose from the ground and wander off without direction. A thrush pecked at the dead leaves near the cookfire and hopped twice when a boy came to feed it crumbs, as if unwilling to admit its dependence. "Wine, my prince?" Lancel Lannister asked in the court-soft voice he had been taught would make men less inclined to strike him. He wore green and gold as if the colors liked him. The wineskin gleamed a darker red than morning could account for. Jon looked at the skin and then at the boy holding it. Lancel had the wide mouth and soft, quick eyes of a lad who had learned too early that a man's favor can be coaxed like a fire and too late that a fire chooses its own fuel. "Later," Jon said mildly. "We hunt better for thirst." Lancel laughed the laugh of a boy being agreeable while not agreeing at all. "His Grace likes to wet the dogs," he said. "Says it makes their throats sing." He tipped his chin toward the king's pavilion, where a low chuckle rolled, the sound a barrel makes when a man thumps it, testing. Robert came out bareheaded, hair bristling, cheeks rough, a man who had slept as men who trust their bodies to forgive them. He wore leather and old mail as if neither could feel his weight any longer. When he saw Jon, he grinned in a way that made him look younger than the beard allowed, and clapped him so that the water in Jon's cup pebbled and lipped against the rim. "Here's my lad," he said, as if he had found gold in a river he had not meant to pan. "Your Grace," Jon said, because he knew how words can be a spur or a bomb, and he had woken wanting neither. Lancel was at the king's elbow, as a fly is at a feast. "A taste to warm you, my lord," he said, presenting the wineskin with both hands, the posture of a boy offering a book to a septon. Robert took it by habit and let his head tilt to swallow. Jon watched the swallow go down like a coin drop down a well and heard in his head a voice that had become a kind of measuring stick. "Do not drink what you do not pour." He let his breath out slowly, and when Robert shoved the skin toward him, he took it with a smile he had practiced in the mirror, gratitude with no appetite in it, and made a show of raising it as if to his mouth. He sniffed instead. A curl of resin touched his nose, a sweetness too clean to be honest. Arbor wine under a lid of something stronger, perhaps, or perhaps he had begun to hear poison in every cup since the tower. He let the skin tilt so that a drop glossed the mouth, set it to his lips, and kept his tongue high as he let a smear of the stuff touch only his lower lip. It warmed and stung and left behind a ghost of apples. He passed the skin back to Lancel before the boy could seem to count the seconds. "Save it for the kill," Jon said lightly. "Wine tastes better when it has watching to sweeten it." Robert laughed and handed the wineskin back with the good-natured impatience of a man who expects pleasure at every turning. "I'll drink the beast's heart," he said. "You can have the wine." Lancel smiled as if he had been told a joke about someone he disliked and was savoring the wit. They went out in a long ripple of motion. Horns told, soft to be kind to morning, then louder to be kind to men. The dogs sang, each voice finding its note, making one noise. Houndsmen cursed fondly, a language as intimate as lovers' talk and more honest. The huntsmen walked with spears that had killed things and had the small notches and dark polish of use and care. Jon had in his hand a boar spear with a crossbar just beneath the head, the lugs that keep a boar from running up a shaft into a man's life. He had listened to an old forester once who said the crossbar was a promise a man made. "I will not let you closer than this." The lesson had been about more than boars. The Kingswood received them with an old patience. The leaves were still thick, though summer had begun to consider its slow retreat. There were places where the light fell in yellow squares and made every dust mote look like a floating coin. There were other places where shadow learned to pool and watch. The horses picked their way with heads down, as if reading. Robert rode at the head because he could not ride anywhere else. He looked good on a horse in a way that new courtiers admired and old soldiers stored away with the saddest things they knew. Lancel kept up, his seat decent, his eyes always weighing whether the king's cup was thirsty. They found sign where the earth had been plowed by tusk. Bark hung in ribbons from the lower trunks. The sap dried and brown along the scraped wounds. A log had been rolled back, the fat white bodies of grubs bitten in half and left as if to spite a man with a tender heart. A pool, shallow and furred with green where pigs had wallowed, stank in a merry way. The old houndsman squatted and put 2 fingers to a print. His knuckles were black scabs of work. "Big," he said, as if speaking to himself, and his mouth smiled without moving from its line. "Boar that knows the woods and knows he knows them." Robert snorted happily. "Good," he said. "Better to kill a thing that believes it will kill you." He shifted the spear against his thigh and flexed his fingers once. The leather glove creaked. "Loose them," he added, and the hounds went boiling through the green. The sound ran away from them into the trees. The baying, then the deeper, stranger music of a boar being told, he is no longer merely gathering himself up from sleep. Men spread like a widening river. Jon kept the spear level not from fear but from respect. He had learned early that things with their own sense of dignity are insulted by men's carelessness, and punish it. Lancel slid up beside him again, the wineskin risen like a bird returning to a favored perch. "A fortifying sip?" he murmured. "The king hunts better for it." "The king hunts," Jon said. "He will hunt no differently for wet or dry." He let his voice warm. "We drink together when it's done." He touched the skin with 2 fingers, the way men touch a relic to show they don't despise it, then pushed his horse deeper into the trees. They came upon the sight suddenly, as men do who hear the story before they see the scene and yet are never ready when the scene declares itself. A boar burst from the undergrowth like an arrow shot out of a green bent bough, the bristles along its back standing, its sides alive with the dark sheen of a thing that has never been to court. The dogs fanned and dived, little knives, then scattered when the boar turned, quick as a thrown thought, and took one under the shoulder. The sound the dog made sounded like a man trying too late to call his mother. Robert was laughing, eyes alight, the spear riding his arm like a lance. He spurred forward and the boar seemed to have been waiting for that. A dancer waiting for the first step to begin its turn. Came straight. In that moment, all the rooms Jon had been taught in, the Tower of the Hand, the council chamber where words are weapons, the yard where weapons are words, the little silent places in the keep where a man can hear himself, were useless. There is a knowing that sits in the hands and feet and back of the neck and either serves you or betrays you. His horse moved under him, eager and skittish, as if it had remembered its ancestor in a story about a hero and a stag. He spoke to it with his knees, nothing else, and felt it give him the space he asked for. Robert set his spear and the boar did not flinch from the point. It came as if points were its business. The head took the spear an arm's length down, as far as the crossbar, and drove Robert's arm back with a jolt that rang his shoulder. The king's breath came out on a laugh that had surprise in it, and the spear but skidded, found nothing, skidded again. The boar was almost on him. Wait, will rage. Jon did not think. He did the thing a body taught to do with a weapon does at last because it has wanted to do it for years. He slid right, out of the line of the king's horse, and let his own spear find the angle that mattered, not the broad chest where the boar has been pushing fate back all its life, but the low behind the foreleg where the ribs part and allow a man entry. The point took, slid, bit. A lunged breath left the boar in a wet snort. The shaft jarred his hands down to the bone. He set his weight, felt the lugs drive and hold, felt the creature's momentum try to teach him about being an unbraced thing in a world of forces, and refused the lesson. For an instant that stretched a long, bright thread through his bones, he held. The boar drove and then the drive found the crossbar and could not pass. He felt the shove tilt into a different weight. The weight of a thing beginning to die and refusing to allow it without some exchange, some price. He gave it his stance and his breath and a scraping of skin along his left forearm from a tusk that had decided to make a small mark before it left the world. Then the boar's legs went soft and the ground took it. Silence came in odd shapes, like bits of a dish dropped too hard. The dogs panted. The forester grunted approval in a tongue older than any man in the party. Robert was still on his horse, leaning over his own spear, chest heaving, a grin cutting his face into youth. A line of froth ran along his beard like a bit of milk on a child's lip. He looked at Jon and burst into a laugh that made two birds take flight together. "Seven hells, boy," he said. "You were there. You held. I saw you hold him." Jon's own breath had gone shallow, then returned, like a tide that has been offended and forgives. The spear in his hands shook once, the same way a hand shivers after a quarrel no one meant to have. He eased it free, and the sound it made was nothing like the sounds in any great hall. Blood came, hot and thick and honest. It steamed a little in the cool under the trees. Lancel was white and did not know it. He had the wineskin in his hands still, like a man who has brought the wrong tool to a task. He looked at Jon as if trying, against his breeding, to like him. A hound limped past with the look of an old soldier who will not yet complain. The forester knelt and laid his hand on the boar's head with something like respect. He looked up and made the old gesture to the first killer present. Robert swung down off his horse and went to the boar with a wobble that he turned into swagger without intending to. He put a hand to the wet flank. It came away red and he rubbed it along Jon's cheek with a boy's delight in old rights. Blood stung where it found the scrape. "Take the head," he said, voice ringing. "We'll have it on the cart before noon. And a spit tonight large enough to shame the poets." He straightened, and the humor dropped out of his face the way ale drops to the bottom of a tankard when the man tips it hard. He turned to Jon and his eyes were clear for a heartbeat, sober with the nearness of an end that had not been his own. He put a hand heavy as a gauntlet on Jon's shoulder and squeezed once. "You saved me," he said without ceremony. "My thanks. You have them as long as I live." He surprised himself by the seriousness in his voice and barked a laugh to make it less. "Wine," Lancel urged weakly, recovering his script. "A draught to steady your grace's hand." Robert looked at him, and there was almost a tenderness in the contempt. "My hand is steady, boy," he said. "You're the one shaking." He took the skin anyway and drank because that was his habit and he loved his habits. He passed it on to Jon. Jon touched it without letting it claim his mouth. He had one drink later because to refuse too often in front of men who loved wine is to make yourself something pointed. They broke the boar. The old ways were done quickly and without making a fuss of them, because the king had no taste for being solemn when he could be merry. Blood on cheeks and a piece of the liver thrown to the dogs and a bit of heart roasted on a stick for the boy who had made the true thrust. Jon chewed it and it tasted of iron and smoke and the kind of honor that leaves a man hungry. The horns blew and the day began to glow around the edges as men imagined the evening. Meat, noise, the easy lies told by men with grease on their fingers. Robert ordered the head set upon a cart. He clapped Lancel's shoulder as if the boy had been the one to hold the boar, and Lancel smiled a smile that thanked and despised the hand in equal measure. They returned to the central clearing by a more open way, men picking up the story of the kill and passing it along like a coin worn thin with the pleasure of exchange. Jon rode in the eddy just behind Robert and let himself feel a small bright thing in his chest that had nothing to do with honor and everything to do with being alive in a morning that had wanted to eat him and had eaten something else instead. When they reached the tents, the cooks were already arguing about how best to butter the boar, as if the boar had any say. Arguments of this kind men love because they put the old quarrels, about truth, about loyalty, aside for a safer war. Jon wiped his spear clean. Metal sings a particular quiet song when blood leaves it. He slipped the blade into oiled leather with relief, as if he had returned a sharp thought to a drawer where it could do no further mischief. Lancel hovered. "You were very quick," he said, and it could have been praise if not for the shadow of accusation behind it. "I was near," Jon answered, and tied the straps with simple care. "Near counts for more in woods than in halls." "I am near the king," Lancel said. "So you are," Jon said, and left it that, because truths spoken too loudly are invitations. Robert ate as if the boar had been invented for him personally and only yesterday. He drank. Jon watched the cups. He had learned to watch and found he did not like what the watching made of him. He chose a moment when the laughter was thick and the smoke made a kind of low roof under the trees, and leaned in close to the king. "Let me mix the wine tonight," he said softly, and let the word mix carry a weight lightly. Robert's eye flicked to him. Something old and clever in the man took its bare head out from under the nests of old joys and looked around. Robert nodded once, a small concession between men who had decided to be honest for an hour. After that, the wine was less sweet. No one noticed but Lancel, and what Lancel noticed he would not admit. The day was still young enough that men pretended to rest. John walked the perimeter of the camp once with Ser Baratheon, who moved as if he had always known where the ground would try to trick him. The white cloak was not white today. It had been folded. He wore plain leather in a way that made the leather seem briefly noble. "Well held," Baratheon said without excessive feeling. "A boar runs through many men's courage. He prefers not to be impressed by our stories." "I saw that," John said. The scrape on his forearm stung when he flexed, a reminder that truth often leaves a small line on a man. He came as if the spear were a suggestion. "The crossbar," Baratheon said. "Men forget why it's there. They like the point better." He glanced sideways, kind. "You can read a spear. It will serve you in rooms as well." "Spears are more honest than rooms," John said, with just enough bitterness to be forgiven as youth. Barristan's mouth tipped. "Sometimes," he said, "but a spear will betray you if you set it wrong, and rooms will save you if you set yourself right." John nodded as if he had been taught a new parry. He thought of the tower, of a hand on a book, of words that had become a hammer. He thought of Stannis's patience and the queen's eyes and the taste of medicine in an old man's throat. He thought of Lancel with the skin and of wine that tasted cleaner when it came from his own hand. By afternoon, messages ran to and from the city like ferrets down a line of burrows. The council fretted at not having a king to scold, then fretted at knowing where he was. Cersei sent a note with a careful hand that offered good wishes wrapped around a coil of advice.
Renly sent ayest.
Varys sent a platter of dried pears from Dorne that had not been near a pear tree in 5 years, and Robert loved them because they were sweet and called them honest anyway. When the sun tilted and the shadows began to point toward the road, Robert stood, rested his palm on the boar's great brow to make a show of blessing or ownership. The line between those is thin, and declared that he would return to the city before full dark. "Let the queen see what killed her temper," he said, and those close enough to hear it laughed too loudly. They had a half-joking argument about who should ride with the head. In the end, the cart went ahead with 4 men walking at its corners like pallbearers with no respect for the corpse. John rode beside the king. Lancel took his place, thin and shining and eager like a new sword that has not yet learned men's hearts are not straw. The party stretched behind into the green like a page of music, notes evenly spaced. The king's road north ran like a held breath. Late sun made the dust lift and float, and in the hollows where the trees held their shade it was cool enough to make a man forgive a day's heat. They reached the near fields with time to spare and came up on King's Landing the way a man comes up on a bad memory when a good walk has made him careless. The city sprawled. It did not sit like a jewel on a hill. It lay like a dog near a hearth. Comfortable, a little sour, necessary. The smell found them in graduated lessons. First water and tar, then bread and shit, then smoke and men. The walls were red as if with embarrassment. Beyond them, the red keep sat like a clenched hand too far from the body to be of any use and yet telling the legs what to do. Before they reached the gate, the story of the boar had gotten there. Boys hopped and ran and hopped again, as if these were the only ways to move forward when a king was about to make the world more interesting. Women with their aprons still on stood in doorway shadows and let their eyes go out and bring the image back to their kitchens. The head, the blood, the men with their careless laughter. A man with a voice designed for people to hear what their better angels had not told them yet cried, "Make way." And the crowd did, in that haphazard way a city does when it is pressed to be orderly and resents it. Robert raised a hand, and the hand was forgiven for what it had done and would do. He beamed like a man who had invented hunting and wanted to share his invention. He looked 10 years lighter for the space of the gate's height and width. The boar's head swayed on the cart, eyes filmed, tusks like poor men's scythes. Jon saw a woman touch her own cheek without knowing why, as if someone had drawn a line of blood there. Lancel smiled as if the attention were a light he had leaned into and found warm. Inside the gate, the press changed its smell to one of expectation and bargaining. A cart wheel shrieked its complaint and someone cursed it as if the wheel had insulted his mother. Hammers spoke to metal in the street of steel. From somewhere farther off, the bells began to tumble notes, as if the city could not decide whether the sound was welcome or warning. A man selling skewers of something that might owe. NCE have been fish held them up hopefully. Robert laughed and promised to come down later and eat everything he oughtn't. The man believed him the way peasants do a king's jokes. At the foot of the long climb, Jon glanced once toward the river. It lay there old and busy, as if it had not noticed the boar, the king, the boy, the promise between them, the poison in some other room, the truth in a book on a table. He thought of Jon Arryn in his chamber, breath catching and going and catching again. Of Stannis arriving with dusk on his shoulders and a ledger under his arm. Of Ned Stark, somewhere near the Mudgate even now, being forced to admit that the smell of King's Landing never changes and somehow always surprises him anyway. "Come on then," Robert said, riding out of the crowd's reach into the courtyard where the keep's stones kept the heat with a miser's grudging love. He looked at Jon with something like pride and something like apology for the day and all the days behind it. "We'll hang the head where the whole damned lot of them can see it, and remember I am not done." He threw his leg over and dropped to the paving with a grunt he tried to make into a laugh. Jon swung down and felt the day settle into him like a blade turned flat and slid back into its sheath. The air tasted of smoke and promise and old iron. He put his hand once to the scrape on his forearm. It had scabbed clean. They walked side by side toward the stairs as the cart creaked forward with its solemn, ridiculous cargo, and the city, which had been preparing its next rumor since dawn, opened its mouth. The city swallowed them the way the sea swallows a river, with an old appetite and no apology. Robert's laughter kept its shape through the arch and up the first length of the cobbles, then broke into smaller pieces as the press closed, as if joy, like light, were something that had to learn to go around people. The cart creaked with its ridiculous honor, the boar's head wagging solemnly as if scandalized by all the fuss. The Red Keep took the procession in coolly, stones that stored the day's heat inside themselves the way an old man stores an argument to be used when a son contradicts him. Jon walked one step back of the king because it allowed him to watch Robert's face the way a sailor watches a line, and because that half-step had become his habit when his own caution would not admit itself. Word traveled ahead on backs and in mouths, kicked upstairs by boys whose job it was to carry nothing but the news. Lancel ran a stag's path where men were supposed to walk, his hair plastered against his forehead with a dew made of nervousness and wine. He climbed with a speed he had never used in service before and reached the Queen's solar winded, chest heaving, as if the news had weighed more than wood. Cersei's women had been playing at stitches. The Queen had been holding a goblet like an answer. When Lancel burst in with his face still open with hope of being the first to please, her eyes went to him with the interest a cat has for a moth. "Well?" she asked Velvet. He grinned, eager, 2 words ahead of himself. "Alive," he said, "victorious." He slew the goblet left her hand without warning, not tossed so much as released with purpose. It hit the jamb beside Lancel's head, shattered into a constellation of green glass and wet red. Wine striped his cheek. A shard nicked his ear. The ladies started up in a flurry and then remembered to be still. Cersei had not moved much. Only her chest rose and fell the slightest bit faster, the way a bellows takes on meaning when a man brings iron to heat. She looked at him as if his blood offended her more than the wine on the wall. "You were to keep him drunk," she said softly. Your Grace." "I did," Lancel stammered, hand to his ear, not from pain but to check whether he still possessed it. He bade me," he swallowed. His mouth had a boy's instinct for a lie and a courtier's sense for when it would make him ridiculous. "He bade me let Jon mix it," he blurted at last stupidly, and flushed to the roots when he heard himself. Cersei's eyes sharpened. then shuddered. "Get out," she said, in the tone of a woman who has remembered that fury and calculation can be made to wear the same dress if cut correctly. Lancel went, trailing the smell of wine and his own new shame, and the queen stood long at the window with her hands opened on the stone, as if she could make the city kneel by teaching the sill to do it first. After a while she rang for a maid to bring a cloth and dabbed the stain on the wall, as if she could take the color back out of the world with a little patience. Far below, a horn announced the boar's head to the courtyard, and the old ritual carried it along the corridors until a guard, who had seen such things often enough to be bored by them and had the sense to hide his boredom, posted the news in the yard. Men came to admire Robertson's laughter, now restored to full throat by proximity to stone and audience. The king clapped shoulders and told the story with a new flourish each time, and by the fourth telling the boar had been 3 hands higher and the spear had been dull at the point. He brought John forward without thinking and thought better of it as soon as he did. He could not help it. Pride is a habit that makes a man forget his plans. In the outer yard, Ser Barristan watched from the shade of a broken tower arch with that unobtrusive attention that had made king after king think him safe. His hair in this light might have been the white of a cloud or the pale of forged iron, depending on what a man had in his own head to compare it to. He did not smile much now. He had the look of a man measuring a beam with his thumb out of practice at lying to himself about the length. He turned at a movement and discovered a figure at the edge of the shade that had not been there when he last looked. It wore a dark traveler's cloak with the hood drawn forward, and its posture had that attentive balance of a man taught to be noisy only when steel demanded it. "Good sir," the hooded man said, voice like water that has learned to go around stones. It carried the veil and the reach and something older that men in the south call the desert of salt, though it has never seen it. "Will a sword have an old friend in this yard?" Barristan did not reach for his own blade. He had long ago taught his body that the first move need not be to cut. He drew closer by a pace and another. The hood went back a little, enough for the light to make of a brow and cheek a map a certain kind of man could read. The eyes were Violet's last thought before night. Barristan's breath came and went very quietly. "Sir Arthur," he said simply. Dane lowered the hood the rest of the way and stood bare to the light as if accounting for himself. He had grown thinner in the year since the tower, a man who has sorted the contents of his life and kept back only what will fit into a traveling bundle and a handful of maxims old enough to be the bones of a saint. He had no sword at his hip. He had brought no talisman to help explain him. He bowed, not to Barristan but toward the center of the yard where the air kept a place empty of all men until the king chose it. "I am come to set a thing that should not have been broken," he said. "If your king will have me." Barristan watched his face a moment longer. He had seen men come with confessions folded into fine speeches and men come with the truth bald and embarrassed. This was neither. This was a man who had made a promise to the shape of himself and had followed it across heat and dust. "Wait," he said softly. "Not here like a thief. Come into the light with me." They crossed the yard together. Heads turned. The sound a place makes when it recollects itself ran ahead of them to the king. An intake, then a murmur, then a silence that men put on when they think it is better to let a moment declare its allegiance. Robert hadn't seen Dane's face since the tower. Not truly. Not this close without the music of steel making a dance of everything. For a heartbeat he did not know him. Then knowing came like heat out of a smithy when a door is opened. "You," he said, with no malice. Dane bowed the second time, this one to the man and not to the empty center. "Ser Barristan," Robert said, without taking his eyes off the old white sword of Dorne. "Is this a ghost you've fetched up for my supper tale?" "A man," Barristan answered.
Ser Arthur Dane.
"He asks to swear again." A movement, not quite a step but the promise of one, from the white of another cloak. Jaime Lannister had been at his ease on the far side of the cart, making a show of studying the boar's great head as if a man might learn how to kill kings by admiring beasts. At the name, his attention came like light off a blade. He came into the conversation like a man stepping onto a stage he has been watching from the wings too long. "He swore to the dragon," Jaime said, clean and bright, a smile like a knife trimmed for a visit. Perhaps he'd like to swear to their skulls instead. There are none left in the cellars, I'm told, but the walls remember. Shut your mouth, Robert said mildly, and the yard flinched at the tone more than at the words. He had not raised his voice. He had merely turned it to strike where it hurt. Jaime's smile went still on his face like a mask. He stepped back a fraction because a step back can be passed off as a shift of weight. The yard breathed again. Dane did not look at Jaime. He kept his eyes on the king because men who have once failed at keeping faith learn not to waste the attention they are given to make it right. Your Grace, he said evenly, I laid my cloak upon the water that took my Lord Commander. I took no sword into exile. I come with my hands empty to make them yours. If oaths live still in a realm where kings are made by men, I would wear white and hold it clean. If not, I will go again and trouble no one. Robert stared at him with the baffled affection he sometimes had for men who made a hard thing simple without asking leave. He saw the tower yard for a second, the hammer wringing Dane's pale blade clean of his grip, a mercy given, a grave refusal to die when death had taken more than was owed. He saw Lyanna's hand. He heard a child breathing in a room that had been kept cool out of kindness. He began to smile and felt the smile become the thing itself. By the gods, he said, I've spent a lifetime with bad men claiming to be good, and here you are, a good one claiming to be nothing. He spread his hands as if offering a bargain. Swear. Let the realm believe I am generous because I am in a hopeful mood. Baratheon stepped half a pace forward, for the sake of the forms. He did not look back to see if the white cloaks in attendance had made a line. They had. You teach men to stand upright in boyhood, and they will do it without remembering who ordered it. Cloth was brought. The old book, kept for such vowing, was fetched from a chest that had not been opened since the last man had been named. Jaime stood to the side with a curiously watchful look, as if trying to decide whether sarcasm or wonder would suit him better later when he told this story to a woman who had taught him to be careful with both. Dane knelt. He did not hesitate. His voice, when he spoke, was very simple, as if the words were learned too early to have been corrupted by a rehearsal for an audience. He swore his life and sword and honor to the king and his lawful issue, and repeated the forms, and did not let his mouth tighten around the word lawful. When it was done, Baratheon lifted the folded white and shook it open, and a dust the eye barely saw rose from the cloth. Years in a chest exhaled. He settled it around Dane's shoulders. It looked right there, not like a costume borrowed. A soft sound ran through the yard. Not admiration, not disdain. Something like relief, as if the world had found the right line in the book and was reading again where it had lost its place. Jaime clapped once, slowly, because a man must stake out some small territory of contempt in a moment that threatens to make him irrelevant. Robert didn't turn to look at him. You'll take your place, he said to Dane. You'll hold your tongue when you must and raise your voice when you should, and this white will mean something on my steps again. He laughed suddenly, as if some private sting had chosen that moment to remind him of itself. You'll also have to teach my son here, he added, jerking his head toward Jon, who had not expected to be called any man's son in public for a while yet. He knows how to hold a spear to a boar. Let's see if he can hold his own counsel to a pack of wolves. Dane looked to the boy for the first time and inclined his head, not as one teacher to a pupil, not as a master to a lesser, but simply in greeting, as equals greet when the time has not yet come to discover which will be called to do which work. I know something of both, he said. I will teach him what can be taught. Good, Robert said, pleased, and clapped Barristan's arm as if the old knight had provided him with a trick that would amuse him for an afternoon and perhaps keep him alive for one or two more. He let his gaze graze Jaime then, just enough to let the younger man feel the king's eye as a weight and not a warmth. As for you, he said, you can use your tongue for eating tonight. Do that and do it well and we will have no trouble. Jaime's teeth showed. As my king commands, he murmured, and drifted to the edge of the yard like smoke leaving a room that no longer suited. Stannis Baratheon had come with dusk. The river's smell still in his clothes, as if the water had wanted to stick to him and make him like itself. He had not gone to the yard. He had gone to the Tower of the Hand and stood in the doorway like a verdict. Jon Arryn lay propped upon pillows that gave under him like men. Pycelle had left him to warmth and godly mutterings and a spoon that smelled of flowers. Stannis looked at the spoon with contempt reserved for small instruments. He looked at the old man's face with an effort not to stare, as if studying the sea's line in a storm. Ned Stark arrived at nearly the same hour, the smell of the road in him still, the ghost of northern cold around his hair, perhaps imagined by men who believed the North a legend and a wind. He had come quick for a man whose honor had learned to go slowly. He had gone first to the godswood that is not a godswood, then to the boy, and only then to the tower. He stood with Stannis at the threshold, and the two of them together could not have been more different if one had been made of oak and the other of iron, and perhaps that is what they were. "Stark," Stannis said, without warmth but without enmity. It sounded like someone naming a tool he intended to use. "Stannis," Ned said, in the tone of a man who has found what he went looking for and is not delighted about it but is too honest to pretend he is surprised. They stood over Jon Arryn together and did not speak at first, because speaking makes things too real too soon. Jon breathed shallowly and without drama, a man who had lived too long with pain to feel the need to gild it now. His eyes moved under their lids. Ned could not help thinking of snow falling on a weirwood's red leaves and wondered why grief so often comes dressed in weather. "He said he would come to you at dusk," Ned said finally, not knowing whether Stannis knew that or whether it would hurt him to be told it. "He is late," Stannis answered, and only in the tightness around the words did it show that lateness, and not the reason for it, offended him most. He shifted his weight, as if the floor beneath him had a habit of giving way. "He's been poisoned," he said abruptly, because he did not know how to treat things gently. "And no one will say so." Ned looked at the spoon. "No one dares say so," he answered, which was an admission of a different sort. He reached down and adjusted the blanket at Jon Arryn's side because a man needs to do something with his hands when given a truth that has nowhere to sit in a room. "The king is returned," he added, "and alive because a boy kept a spear where it could do work." Stannis's jaw moved once, a tightening against the lower lip as if to remind it that emotions were not to be allowed there. "That boy," he said, "a bastard made Baratheon by name." Ned said nothing. He thought of a room in a tower and a small warm weight in his arms and a woman's voice that had gone far away and yet sounded like snowfall inside his chest forever after. He thought of Robert's hand making a promise because he could not bear to keep what was true. "We'll speak to the king," he said at last. "We will," Stannis said. Sounded like law. News always finds its way to a queen sooner than to a king. It's not a riddle, only a fact of architecture. Servants checked their posture at the doors. Littlefinger measured the new information against his old and smiled a private sum. Varys's shadow did the work of 3 men of greater height and less advantage. The red keep put on evening as a dress it had worn too often to be excited by and went about its business, which is keeping men in their places and lies in their harness. Robert saw Ned and came at him like a man to water. They embraced in the old way that looks like an argument from a distance and feels like trade to those inside it. "You've come," Robert said, and his voice was as if a younger man had borrowed it for an hour. "Good. There are too many courtiers here, and none of them drink like men. I came because Jon Arryn sent for me, and because the river carries more rumors than fish," Ned said, but he smiled, because he could not help it and because he had not forgot the boy in the yard with a stick that had been a sword in both their heads. "You have a boar to boast of." "I have a son to boast of," Robert said, surprising himself, and laughed to wipe away his own confession. "The boar is only meat." The boy held. He sobered then, which is a thing he did for Ned more often than for any other living soul. "Jon," he said. "He looks like a man who's gone too far down a cold road and thinks the door he's come to is a hearth." He scrubbed his beard. "We'll eat," he said, turning the day toward evening with a king's simple force. "We'll sit. We'll talk." They sat in a smaller room than the great hall because a man is not a king in front of 20 tables. He is a host, and Robert had never intended to be only a host. Stannis came as if to a hearing. Ned came as if to a winter that had been invited and might be made to behave. The table held bread, meat, a pot of something that called itself a stew and might be believed, and a platter of those damned pears that Varys had made appear from a desert with his usual good manners. Robert pushed the wine toward Jon's seat, and Jon pushed it back with a look that made the king snort. "Mix it yourself, then," Robert said indulgently, "so I'll not be murdered by a cousin of mine with hair like straw." His gaze flicked to Stannis, not unkindly. "Your man," he added. "You'll deal with him." "I will," Stannis said, and the words were about more than Lancel. He cut his meat into even squares, as if a lesson had been taught to him at a table once so sternly he had been unable to forget. Ned took bread and put salt on it, as the old northern words taught a man to do if he wished to remind himself what hospitality used to mean when it was not yet a political instrument. They ate a little to teach the food its place. They drank something so the wine would not feel unappreciated and make mischief. "Arthur Dayne," Robert said after a while, with the air of a man tossing a stone into a pool to see whether anything alive still lurks beneath. "Back from his river to my yard, asking to wear white. I took him." He grinned. "Feral. Jaime didn't like it. I liked that he didn't." Ned's mouth made a shape, a brief expression of the past reaching out to touch the present with one finger. "He lived," he said softly, and felt the old relief and the old resentment that a man who takes an oath so seriously can also make your promise heavier by doing it. "He will keep it." "He will," Stannis said shortly, "and it will make other men nervous to see a man in white who has not turned himself into a rumor in order to feel important." "Good." He drank and did not flinch at the taste. "Jon Arryn," he went on, "because he does not waste time on pleasantries when work stands waiting. Poison." The old man had sense enough to read the book. He came to the conclusion. They made certain he could not carry it to a mouth that would be believed. Ned looked into the cup as if a pattern might arrange itself on the wine's skin if he stared long enough. "He told the boy to remember," he said. "He told him the seed is strong." Robert's jaw worked, a slow clench as if chewing a truth that had been overcooked. "Everyone tells me that," he said. "Everyone tells me things." He looked at the meat and not at either of them. He lifted his head at last. "Will you tell me he's dying?" he asked, and the question, naked as it was, put all three of them in a room no longer the king's or the hand's or the wolf's. It was the old room they always returned to when the world demanded from them what only boys ought to be asked for, faith. Stannis nodded once. Ned bowed his head in that old prayer to a god he never could convince lived in the south. Robert sat back and breathed and took up his cup and drank from what Jon had mixed, and it tasted like wine and water and honesty, which is a draught men do not prefer because it does not make songs inside them but does make them remember the ones worth hearing. He set the cup down. "Then we will do what we always do," he said, voice roughened but firming. "We will eat. We will count. We will decide how much truth can be carried in the morning without our backs breaking. And we will carry that much." "Tomorrow," Stannis said. "Tomorrow," Ned said. Robert looked at them both, and the look was the thing that had made men follow him when he was young. A kind of promise that he would be the one to make and break them with. "Tonight," he said gentler. "We'll let the boar be a story and the boy a man. After, we will turn back to ledgers and oaths and the long cold river that never stops its questions." He picked up a pear and bit into it with a grin that left juice on his beard. "Gods," he said around the bite. "Varys and his candies. He'll be fattening me for someone's feast, the fussy spider." Ned smiled despite himself. Stannis did not. The candles leaned and steadied. Outside, the river went on its old road, and somewhere in the Tower of the Hand an old man's breath took its careful measure of the night as three men who had been boys together ate and planned and pretended for these few moments that food and fellowship are armor. Within that small ring of light, the city stood back, and the realm listened at the door without understanding the words. The room had the kind of warmth that comes more from breath and bread than from the fire, the heat of men making themselves believe that a table is a shield. The candles had been trimmed to honesty. They did not sputter, and they did not pretend to be stars. A fat fly battered itself against a shutter as if trying to worry its way into the talk. Jon rose when the servant leaned to refill Robert's cup and put his hand over the rim without ceremony. "Let it be," he said to the boy, and the boy looked not to Robert, not to Stannis, but to Ned. Ned's mouth did not move. He only shifted his eyes to Jon in the old way a father does when he intends to see whether a boy has learned a lesson without telling him the answer. Jon lifted the jug himself and tipped, watching the thread catch the cup's lip. He added water from the pitcher after, plain and clear. Robert made a show of rolling his eyes for 2 heartbeats and then settled into the taste with a grunt that was half concession, half relief he would never admit to. He thumped the cup down as if to remind it who was king. "You can go," he told Jon, not unkindly, and then remembered to add, "Tell Baratheon I want Arthur Dayne lodged where men can find him if they need him, not in some rat's corner. He'll have white again by morning. And tell Dayne that I'll see him at dawn in the yard to make sure his sword has learned the shape of another king's shadow." Jon nodded. "Yes, your grace." He looked once to Ned, once to Stannis, and took his leave more like a man than a boy. No scraping, no display of humility, only the courtesy of someone who understands that a thin wall of quiet stands around certain conversations, and it is a kindness not to try to listen through it. When the door had shut and the other doors had been made to believe themselves too far to matter, Stannis drew his knife through the crust of a loaf as if demonstrating that there are ways to divide the world that do not require civil war. "Your squire is a fool," he said. Robert snorted. "He's a Lannister cousin," he said, as if that were both accusation and pardon. "A cup on legs. I've too many cups and too many legs in my halls. He's one more. Cersei's little hawk." "He's a boy carrying a skin full of something someone else mixed," Stannis said, cutting the bread into equal squares, stacking them, taking none. "And he thinks himself important for it." "He is," Robert said dryly, "important enough to have his ear cut by my queen's goblet. She's learned a new way to sing." He laughed, and the laugh was a rough, stony thing. What did she do? Frighten him into growing hair on his chest? "She frightened him into telling her you lived," Ned said mildly. He reached for the salt and used 2 pinches, careful. "And into admitting that Jon mixed your wine." Robert's mouth tightened around the edge of a smile that had decided better of coming. "She'll be kind to the boy tomorrow," he said. "That's how lions teach their little ones to keep close to the den. Cuff, then a lick. It works on men, too." He took a long breath that he let out slow. "Ser Arthur," he added, suddenly lighter. "7 hells, I never thought to put him in white in my hall. It makes me look honest." "It makes the white look what it is supposed to be," Ned said. "Not a pageant." He tore his bread, ate without tasting, and drank the small draught he allowed himself in such rooms. He looked at Robert across the board. "What will you do with Jaime when he jests at oaths in public?" Robert made a face as if he had swallowed a bone. "Send him to his sister to be polished," he said. "He's brave, but he's never learned how to be small. The white makes some men shrink until they fit it, and others swell until they tear it. He's the second." He flicked his fingers, annoyed. "Let him sulk. Dane's there to look noble for the poets. Baratheon will do the work. The rest can haunt corridors and frighten maidens." Stannis set his knife down and pushed the plate a hand's breadth away as if to clear the table of petty things. "We will speak of Jon Arryn," he said. "We must." Robert glanced at the door as if the talk might be overheard by the walls and repeated to the wrong man. Then he nodded once. "Speak then," he said. Stannis had a way of parting words that made them look like clean bones. "He read the lineages," he said. "He spoke of your seed and of what every steward in your house can see with his eyes when the ledgers are thin and you bring a new Baratheon to the hall. Black of hair, black of hair, black of hair. There are things in that book worth more than the paper." He did not look at Robert as he said it. He looked at Ned, because some truths are better delivered with a witness who understands their shape. "I know what is in the book," Robert said heavily. "I can't read as quick as you, brother, but I can see." He rubbed his thumb along the cup's rim. You think I haven't looked into my son's face and seen?" He stopped, the word lost. "A king can be strangled by the same rope as any man." "They are mine," he said, stubborn and unhappy. "In law and noise, the realm will say so." "The realm says what you pay it to," Stannis said. "For a while." "Enough," Ned murmured, not to forbid the conversation but to keep it from galloping where it would not be caught. "You both know what must be thought and what must be proved. Jon Arryn is ill. That is the nearest work." He spoke the old name with care, as a man moves a glass that has cracked but will hold one more time. "We will not argue men out of their blood at this table. Not in one night." Robert leaned back until the chair creaked. He stared at the rafters for a long stretch, as if counting how many different carpenters had left their hand in the wood. "Was it Pycelle?" he asked suddenly. Stannis's face made a dismissive cut. "He's a fool and a sycophant," he said. "He would poison the sun if the Lannisters told him it was right, but he wouldn't grind the powder himself. He likes to think his hands are clean." The tone in which he said clean made it sound like a disease. The kitchens, the cupbearers, an apothecary who owes a favor, Varys's little birds. His mouth drew tight. It could be any of a dozen little mouths. That's how you kill a man who has eyes. You feed his death through other men's throats. "Ask Varys," Robert said. "He'll tell you a story with a lesson in it. He always does. Then ask Littlefinger. He'll tell you where to buy the lesson for less." The old anger stirred in his voice like a bear prodded awake and deciding whether to bother rising. "7 hells, I'll ask them both and I'll ask them together. Let them watch each other while they lie to me." Ned smiled without joy. "Ask them separately," he said. "Men lie more cheaply when they imagine they are the only ones with the idea." "We need the kitchens," Stannis said. "We need the names of every hand that touched a spoon for the hand these last weeks. We need to know who sent what to whom and when. We need to turn out Pycelle's chest and see how many old wives' recipes he keeps for sending men to their gods gently." He glanced at Ned. "And we need the book, not because I like books, because men will say we have made ghosts beat their chests otherwise, and they will be right to laugh." "The book is in the tower," Ned said. Jon Arryn kept it near his hand like a rosary. His voice softened. "He told Jon, he told the boy." Robert looked sharply at him. "What did he tell him?" "To remember," Ned said, "and to carry true things carefully." Robert grunted. "He has more sense than his father, then," he said. He took a bite of meat and chewed as if trying to grind irritation into something digestible. After a time he swallowed and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Cersei will be told that Arthur Dayne stood in my yard," he said, changing the weather because the one they were talking under had become cold. "She'll find a way to make it an insult." "She already has," Stannis said. "The goblet was about you living and about the boy who made you live. Dayne is about you remembering a promise that never paid her a dividend." He pushed one of the squares of bread to the rim of Ned's plate without looking, as if redistributing the inequalities of the world were as natural to him as breathing. "She'll invent a grudge against Dayne. Jaime will carry it like a torch. The court will warm its hands." Ned's thoughts had been elsewhere. They came back and found the table like a shoreline. "Arthur Dayne," he said, tasting the name as if it were a fruit he had tried once and then dreamed of for years. "When I was a boy, I wanted to meet him for honor. Now I meet him for work." He drank a mouthful that made him cough once and hid it. "He will stand the line. That matters." Robert's eyes creased. "You like him," he said. "I like men who keep their oaths to the end," Ned said, and left silence for the end he had in mind to fill the room itself. They ate. Talk thinned into the kind of pauses that come when each man sets his own thoughts in order and pretends to see only the table. Servants came and went the way good servants do, smoothing the world around them without ever being seen to do it. The fly at the shutter fell still at last, common fate. Outside the narrow window, the courtyard passed through one of those intervals of quiet that cities have, when the last of the day's noise has gone down a drain and the night's has not yet learned its voice. Robert refilled his own cup this time, a gesture that told a woman more than a speech and which these two men read with equal ease. "You saved me," he said suddenly, and Ned had to tell himself he meant the boy. "That boar had the better of me all the same. It had a mind to teach me the lesson that wants my ear these days." "Not today," Ned said. "The lesson can wait." Robert snorted. "Lessons don't wait," he said. "They sit in the corner and watch you make a stew of yourself and then come up at the very end to tell you where you went wrong. That's why men learn to drink." He stared at the wine and didn't lift it. "I am glad he was there. I will tell him so sober once. So he has it without having to push through the smell of me to reach the words." "He'll remember either way," Ned said. "He will," Stannis said. "He's a boy careful with memory." He didn't mean it entirely as praise. Caution in a boy is useful to kingdoms and unfair to boys. "He should not be in rooms where poison is a tool men consider to hand." "He lives in my rooms," Robert said. "And all rooms in this keep are like that, if you stand still long enough to let the walls lean in and speak." He put his hand flat upon the board. "Enough," he said. "We'll do what can be done that isn't merely threatening to do it. Stannis, you will take the kitchens and the apothecaries and any old woman with a recipe. Pull their cupboards down and count their vials. Do it with your face. Men tell you truths just to make you go away faster." Stannis's mouth quirked, which in his case was as near to a smile as a wolf comes to a purr. "I will," he said. "Ned," Robert went on, "you'll go to Jon Arryn. Sit with him as far into the night as you can stand. If he can be brought up from where he is for a last talk, you'll be the one to haul him. You've always been strong in the ways that matter at the last." Ned looked down so that no one would see the wince the words brought to his face. "I will sit with him," he said, "and I will ask him the old questions, and I will let him not answer the ones that hurt. I'll have Dane in white by the first bell," Robert said, thinking aloud now, turning work into sentences as a man stacks wood for a staying fire. "Baratheon will stand guard on the hand's door, and Jaime can preen somewhere Cersei can praise him for it. If Varys wants to whisper in my ear, he can join me in the yard at dawn. I'll hear better with a sword in my hand." "He would prefer to speak to your shadow," Stannis said dryly. "Shadows are flattered by attention." "Then I'll bring a torch," Robert said, and the rough cheerfulness in his voice worked for a moment. They all felt it, the old sense that a taller man's certainty could lift the world an inch, silence again of the better kind. They let it sit until it began to ferment into something useful. "Tell me about the tower," Robert said suddenly, voice low, and for a moment Ned thought he meant the Tower of the Hand and the book upon it, the breath that went and came and went. But Robert's eyes were not in this room when he spoke. They were far back upon a sun-drenched yard, and a pale blade stuck point-first in dusty ground, vibrating lightly after a hammer had knocked it clean into the sky. "There were 3, Ned said, "because a story must begin with a number when a man cannot speak the names. Then there were none. She was there. She asked you." He felt his throat close like a fist around the rest. He made his hand unclench and tore bread again to give the gesture something harmless to do. "You kept it," he finished. Robert stared at the table for a long time. "I did," he said. The room heard the weight in his chest shift, the clink of chains lightly rearranged. "I will again." Stannis looked from one to the other. He did not have interest in that story. He had respect for its power over the one man whose life he had tried to organize since boyhood. "Eat," he said brusquely to break the spell. "Then we work." They ate. The stew was better than it looked. The pears were too sweet. The wine did what wine does when it is made to behave. When they were done, they were no more sated than men are when they have been talking in circles and managing their fear, but they were steadier. Stannis wiped his knife on bread and ate the bread as if defying guilt to accuse him of waste. "If Jon Arryn speaks again," he said, "it will be to say little and it will cost him much." He set his knife carefully down and squared it with the edge of the board. "It may be that all we will have is the book and our own eyes. We will be called liars. So be it." He paused. "We cannot move upon a queen with only what we think. We cannot allow men to think we would. "We will not," Robert said shortly. "She has given me children. She has given me court." The word sounded like a thing found under a rock. "I won't turn my halls into a den of dogs chasing each other's tails for want of a rat." He leaned in, a king confiding without meaning to. "But I will not be made a fool in my own house," he added softly, and in that softness was the old edge, the hammer's promise. "Then you will need patience," Ned said, and said it as a man might say snow. "More of it than you like. We will collect what can be collected. We will ask the right questions in the wrong rooms and the wrong questions in the right ones. We will wait to see who brings us the answers without meaning to." He drew the candle's stub nearer and rotated it to catch its drippings in the dish. Jon Arryn waited his whole life for truths that did not hurt to use. He did not find them. He used the ones he had. He looked up. "We will do the same." Robert nodded as if that hurt his neck. "You always talk like winter is listening," he said, and managed a half-smile for it. "Fine, let it listen. It can eat after I do." Stannis stood. He did not scrape the bench back rudely. He lifted it as if to teach the bench how to behave. "I'll start," he said. "Now?" Robert asked, startled into a laugh. "Will you shake the kitchens out of their nightshirts? I will find the men who stand at the doors and ask them their names until the ones who have something to hide look at their shoes," Stannis said. "And then I will wait outside their wives' windows in the morning and ask them what they put in the basket for market yesterday. We will begin there." He looked to Ned. "I will meet you at the tower before dawn. If the old man dies in the dark, I would rather know it because I was watching the dark than because someone woke me."
Ned nodded.
He did not say the words that tugged at his throat. Let him have one more morning. He had learned that asking gods for favors shames men who do not receive them. "We will meet there," he said. Robert lifted his cup. This time he did not drink. He held it up as if to catch some benediction falling from the rafters. "To Jon," he said quietly. "To Jon," Ned said. Stan is paused, unwilling, then bent to it. "To Jon Arryn," he said, giving the old man his name, as if a precise naming might offend death enough to delay its work. They drank. The candle sputtered once and then remembered itself. The fire shifted, sending up a column of sparks that thought better of their escape and fell back into the discipline of coals. A sound came from the corridor, a step, and then it faded, and the room returned to that particular intimacy that comes when men know their talk matters and cannot bring themselves to admit they might be wrong. Robert set his cup down and rubbed his eyes with thumb and forefinger. "I'll send for Varys at dawn," he said, "and for Peter. If I talk to them apart, they'll each think I'm letting the other whisper in my other ear. It will make them careful." "They're careful already," Stannis said. "Make them tired." He lifted the loaf, tore it neatly, and tucked a piece into his sleeve the way a man on campaign does when he knows a morning will be longer than men promise each other at night.
Ned stood.
His knees objected, old northern complaints from a boyhood of snow and falls and rising. He ignored them in the old way, by not giving them the words to make their plea into a fact. "I'll go to the tower," he said. "If Jon Arryn wakes, I will bring you his words before they are cold. If he does not, I will bring you his book and mine." Robert reached across and took his wrist, brief and hard. "Bring me my friend," he said. "I'll bring you what he leaves," Ned answered gently, which is the same thing and not the same thing. Stannis moved to the door and opened it himself. He did not like to be opened for. The corridor breathed in. Night had finally chosen its hour and put on its sound. The three men came out one by one, their separate shapes caught for a moment in the candlelight slicing the hall. Somewhere far below, the boar's head was being hoisted to a place where it could remind men of violence and feast. Somewhere above, a woman with green eyes turned in her bed and found sleep impertinent. On a higher wall, a white cloak lay across a chest and waited to find a shoulder again at first light. They did not walk together. Robert turned toward his chambers, his step heavy and deliberate, as if declaring the floor his each time he put his foot down. Stannis went the other way without looking, a dark stroke of purpose down the corridor. Ned took the middle road toward the Tower of the Hand and the Old Book and the Older Breath. The city around them settled, as far as King's Landing ever does, and the river outside spoke its one story, over and over, to pilings that had learned patience and to boats tied like truths not yet set loose.